Well, Saturday afternoon, the Free Woj movement finally worked. Woj dropped his famous Woj bomb when he announced that Tom Thibodeau had agreed to a 5-year deal with the Knicks. What the media was reporting about the Knicks coaching situation days before the Thibodeau hire had been all over the place. Just one day before the Knicks hired Thibodeau, it was actually reported that the Knicks were leaning towards hiring Jason Kidd as head coach. I even made a video on this very topic, and it literally only took a day for my video to become irrelevant. Interestingly enough, Thibodeau wasn't even my first choice. I'm actually on record for supporting Kenny Atkinson. I thought that Kenny would be a perfect fit for the current Knicks roster, as Kenny has a strong record of player development and the Knicks are still a rebuilding team. But even though Tibbs wasn't my first choice, I still believe Thibodeau is a good or even potentially great hire. The main reason for this is because say what you want about Tibbs, but there's no doubt that he's a very good coach. But there are some areas where I think Tibbs is a bit outdated, and I think he needs to adjust his style to fit the modern game. I will explain all of this, but before we continue, I'd appreciate it if you guys would drop a like on the video and subscribe. I love making content for you guys, and supporting the channel by subscribing really helps me to produce more dope videos. Now let's continue. As I stated before, Thibodeau is undoubtedly a very good coach. He's made every team that he's been a part of a lot better. He turned a young Bulls team back in 2010 into a legit title contender. The Timberwolves were a joke of a franchise before Tibbs got there. They hadn't made the playoffs in 14 years, and under Tibbs, they were a 47-win team and actually were a top 4 seed in the West until Jimmy Butler got hurt in the middle of the season. Tibbs won the Coach of the Year award in 2011, and he has a career win-loss record of 59%, which is very good. The people that are making out hiring Tibbs as an awful hire are ridiculous. You could argue that he isn't the right fit, but Tibbs is a very good coach, and his resume speaks for itself. Now, a huge part of the reason that a lot of people are against the Knicks hiring Thibodeau is because they say his player development skills are bad, and I don't necessarily agree with that. If you look at Tibbs' record, there are tons of successful player development stories on his record. Flight Mike, for example, said that the Knicks hiring Thibodeau was a mistake, and his main reason was player development.
If you look at Tom Thibodeau's track record, he started his NBA career inheriting a team that was viewed as probably the best team in the East or the second best team in the East if you want to have the Miami Heat over them. But I feel like the Chicago Bulls, the Tom Thibodeau-led Chicago Bulls, have the potential to beat those Miami Heat teams.
Okay, so this actually isn't true at all. When Thibodeau inherited the Bulls, they were not a very good team. In fact, all it really takes is a Google search to realize that the Bulls were a 500 team and an 8th seed the year before Tibbs got hired back in the 2009 to 2010 season. The next year, under Thibodeau, the Bulls would go on to make a 21-win jump and get 62 wins and finish with the best record in the NBA. Now, before the season started, the Bulls were viewed as a team that was on the come up, but they weren't viewed as a team that was about to become the best team in the league. For example, Bleacher Report in their season preview predicted that the Bulls would win 49 games and finish as the 4th seed before the year started. Yes, the Bulls were expected to make a jump, but under Thibodeau, they played way above expectations. So he's really discrediting Tibbs here. But it's also important to note that when Tibbs inherited the Bulls, they were a mix of young players and veterans. And a lot of those young players really became a lot better under Thibodeau. For example, you can look at Derrick Rose. Now, to be fair, D Rose was already good before Tibbs got there. He was averaging 21 points per game in 2009. But under Tibbs, Rose jumped to an absolute superstar and MVP. He at least deserves some credit for putting Rose in a situation to succeed. But Rose isn't the only young player who blossomed under Tibbs' coaching. Joakim Noah, for example, was just a third-year player when Thibodeau got the job. He was good in 2010, but under Tibbs, Joakim Noah became the Defensive Player of the Year and a top 4 MVP candidate in 2014. Another player success story under Thibodeau I want to talk about is Taj Gibson. When Tibbs inherited the team, Gibson was only in his second year in the NBA. And under Tibbs' coaching, Gibson became one of the top role players in the league. He became not only an excellent defender and rebounder, but someone who could also score the ball pretty well. In fact, Gibson still thinks very high of Tom Thibodeau to this very day. Just a few months ago, Gibson gave Tibbs his ringing endorsement. Here's what he had to say about him. He can do it. If you want to win, he can do it. If the main goal is about winning and developing guys and pushing guys to the limit, he can do it. You look at a lot of the guys he's had over the years, a lot of them were hard-nosed and a lot of them give him his due credit. He's one of those coaches, he doesn't leave the gym. He loves coaching, he loves developing guys, but at the same time, you've got to want to be better. So as we can see from Gibson, Tibbs does a good job of trying to put his players in a position to succeed, but they have to be willing to put in the work. So this idea that Thibodeau isn't about player development is clearly false. Based on Gibson and the success of many of his former players, Tibbs is pretty good at player development. The last example I want to talk about from the Bulls is Jimmy Butler. Nobody expected Butler to become a star when he was drafted in 2011. In his first couple of years, Butler was just a defensive specialist, but under Tibbs, he really expanded his game and became a legit star. I think it's only fair to give Thibodeau credit for these player development success stories on the Bulls. If a guy like Kenny Atkinson can get credit for developing guys like D'Angelo Russell and Karis LeVert on the Nets, how can you not give Tibbs credit for developing the young players on the Chicago Bulls? And even before he became a head coach, Tibbs did a good job of developing. Tibbs, of course, was an assistant coach in the NBA for years. One of the players that Thibodeau worked with was the late, great Kobe Bryant. In fact, Tibbs played a significant role in making Kobe into the all-time great player that he became. One of the teams Tibbs was an assistant coach for was the Philadelphia 76ers, which is in the same city that Kobe played high school in. According to the legend Kobe himself, Thibodeau was great for his development. Here's what Kobe said about Thibodeau about 10 years ago. He was crucial. He was with me when I was 16 or 17 years old, just doing drills and just working on ball handling and just teaching me the game. He was there from day one. So by closely analyzing Tibbs' track record as a coach in the NBA, I think the idea that Tibbs doesn't develop players is a myth. He has a lot of success stories across his career, and if the Knicks are committed to a rebuild, you can make an argument that the Knicks made a great choice to help their young players develop. It's also important to mention that player development is not just the head coach's job. Assistant coaches also play a huge role in the development of players. Assistant coaches do drills with players in practice and examine film to point out players' weaknesses to help them improve. Furthermore, I think the Knicks' current crop of young players fits the type of mold of players that Tibbs likes. It's clear from Tibbs' Bulls days that he loves blue-collar players, guys with a great work ethic who play hard on both ends of the floor. Tibbs will develop, but you need to be willing to put in the work. I think this is a huge part of the reason he didn't mesh with non-defensive players like Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. If you look at the Knicks' young core, RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, and Frank Ntilikina are all hard workers that play on the defensive end. These guys fit the mold of the type of players that Thibodeau prefers. Thibodeau could be the perfect coach to help these young players blossom. If Tibbs was able to develop Kobe and was able to help Jimmy Butler become a star, I'm sure he could help RJ Barrett become an absolute superstar. RJ Barrett had a good rookie year despite what the haters say. He plays hard on the defensive end and he has a very strong work ethic. I'm sure Thibodeau is going to do everything he can to help RJ Barrett fulfill his potential. He's already started watching film to examine the Knicks roster. Mitchell Robinson in just 2 years is already elite on the defensive end. If Joakim Noah became a Defensive Player of the Year under Thibodeau, why can't Tibbs turn Mitch into one of the best centers in the NBA? Frank Ntilikina will never be a star, but we know that he's one hell of a defender, and Thibodeau prefers guys that play well on the defensive end. I'm sure Thibodeau will make sure Frank is getting his minutes next year. I think Tibbs is going to help these guys all maximize their potential. But while I do think that Tibbs will do a good job with the Knicks roster, I do have my reservations. I do think that Tibbs needs to make adjustments if he wants to be successful in the modern NBA. The major thing I need Tibbs to adjust is his allocation of minutes. It's well known that Tibbs runs his players into the ground. Part of that is the minutes. Thibodeau tends to run really short rotations and play his starters way too many minutes. Even though those Bulls players were successful, I think that the main reason they broke down so early in their careers was because Tibbs overplayed them. For example, Joakim Noah wasn't even that old when he fell off a cliff. When the Knicks signed Noah in 2016, he was only 31. All-stars tend to decline at 31, but they are usually still pretty good. Noah was absolute hot trash in his years with the Knicks. Guys like Derrick Rose and Luol Deng fell off before they were even in their 30s. Tibbs needs to adjust his allocation of minutes. If he runs RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson over 38 minutes a game, they're going to break down in their late 20s, which is going to shorten the window that the Knicks have to win a championship. Hopefully, Thibodeau is willing to change this about his coaching style. To Thibodeau's credit, he has said he's willing to adapt, but we have to see it on the court first. While I do have my reservations, I do believe this is a great hire for the Knicks, and I do believe he'll put the Knicks' young core in a position to succeed. What's important now is for the Knicks to put more talent on the roster. The Knicks need to nail their draft picks and get the right players in free agency, and we'll find out if they can do that in the coming months. They also need to fill out their coaching staff, but hiring Tibbs as head coach was a good move. But with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Do you think hiring Tibbs was a good move? How long will he last here? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video so it does well on YouTube's algorithm, and enjoy the rest of your day.